บริษัทของท่านได้ผ่านการรับรองจากคณะกรรมการ CAC เป็นความสำเร็จที่น่าชื่นชมนะครับและผมเชื่อว่าบริษัทต่างๆที่ถ้าเผื่อเราสามารถให้ความสำคัญกับการป้องกันการทุจริตและลงมือทำจริงจังด้วยการดำเนินการตามแนวทางที่ทาง CAC ได้กำหนดไว้รวมถึงทำอย่างเดียวที่หลายบริษัทในวันนี้ได้ทำเนี่ยก็คงจะทำให้เรามีเครือข่ายของการต่อต้านการทุจริตที่เข้มแข็งนะครับแล้วก็นำมาสู่การลดทอนปัญหาได้ในที่สุด Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to speak in English to introduce to you our very special guest for our special event today, Mr. Peter Wilkinson from the UK. Mr. Wilkinson is a world-class anti-corruption expert with extensive experience in anti-corruption, in corporate social responsibility, and in community-focused investment. He is an independent consultant and is at present a senior advisor to Transparency International UK on private sector anti-corruption. At this time, he is working on a revision of the UN Global Compact's reporting guidance on the 10th principle against corruption. But I think what we should really know is that Mr. Wilkinson is the author of the Transparency International's original 241 anti-bribery guidelines, which is the backbone of our 71 anti-corruption checklist that has been adopted by the CAC for our work here in Thailand that you are all familiar with. So today we have a chance to meet him and also to hear him in person. Today, Mr. Wilkinson will speak on the topic of clean business engagement with the public sector. You will hear firsthand his advice on how to address the challenge of managing these sensitive issues of political influence and engagement in the context of corporate anti-bribery practices. I am sure that his insight will be useful for us here in Thailand to understand the complexity and the changing world of business and politics. How do they cross paths and how best to manage this interaction with a high ethical standard. So without any further delays, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Wilkinson to the stage.
I would like to say how pleased I am to be here at this event because of my earlier involvement with the design of the self-evaluation tool. And I want to congratulate the winners of awards today because this is a very big achievement. And, and I'd like to tell you something about the origin of the self-evaluation tool before we move on to the subject of the presentation. It's not... Yes, the self-evaluation tool was designed as a result of the drawing up of the Business Principles for Counting Bribery, which was a TI initiative, a Transparency International initiative, and it was field tested in India at Tata Iron and Steel. And out of that, we had a great number of questions which we had been asking the company, and we also did it on 2 other companies. And I felt that they would make a very useful self-improvement tool as questions for companies to ask themselves, are we doing that? Not as a tick box exercise, but really as a method to provoke thinking. So that's really the theme of my presentation today, is to provide you with some thoughts, but not to give you answers, and particularly looking at certain areas. I would say that the initiative, the CAC initiative, is the only one I know of its type in the world. There is a similar initiative in Malaysia, but it doesn't focus on anti-bribery to the extent that is achieved here through the use of the self-evaluation tool. So I think it's a formidable achievement which I've seen today and is worthy, I think, of a global platform to show the way that collective action, businesses working together, can actually achieve change over time. and of course improve your own efforts. Now, lying behind the tool is a systems approach, and I won't bore you with this too much, but basically it's a cycle which you'll see in any process system. So when I get to talk about the political engagement exercise, the words I give there will be based on this methodological approach of the systems approach. Now, I was thinking about the work of the CAC and the points I wanted to make in this presentation. Now, I will be repeating the same points right through. But the things that really interest me in anti-corruption are, first of all, the role of the board. And I think we're seeing greater emphasis globally on the attention that the board gives to the area of integrity and anti-corruption. And we've seen in the financial scandals in recent years, notably in the UK, the consequences where boards perhaps didn't give the attention they should have done. So this is a big thing, and I've ticked the boxes where I think that CAC is giving attention. Of course, by your very presence here today, and it's an IOD initiative, you tick the box. One of the areas which I pursue is going a lot beyond compliance. We have the laws, the FCPA and so on, but really for companies to achieve things, you have to go beyond. This is the only way that you really get practical procedures which are real and flexible to your organization's needs. And again, I think you get a tick because this is a beyond compliance initiative. Again, embedding continuous improvement and excellence. I would like to see, and as I'll say later on, anti-bribery practice to be incorporated in the quality management and excellence management processes. And again, a tick box. And results orientation. If we do the excellence approach, it should be delivering business value and also contributing to society through improving the integrity standards in a society, making it a better environment for business to operate in. And again, this is something you're working on, you get a tick. The area of stakeholder consultation doesn't get a tick. It's a complex area. Whom do you consult with? What do you consult on? But if it's done properly, by talking to those who have a material interest in your business, you will learn things and can feed into your excellence process. So that doesn't get a tick box on this one, but maybe you will argue it should. Collective action, this speaks for itself. This is a collective action initiative, and I think is a way forward. Finally, the big area, which is the main thing I want to leave with you, apart from the board oversight today, is that of transparency and reporting. That is, being open about your organization and telling the world what you do and the efforts you make and the things you'd like to, and how you achieve it. So I think there's a big opportunity here for the CAC in this arena. The content of today's presentation is in 3 parts. The political process, which you've heard about. Should companies engage in it, and if so, how, and how can this be done responsibly? Very interestingly, someone once said to me in a very large company, that he was the compliance officer, this is frontier country, and that was some years ago. The world of anti-corruption, anti-bribery is changing very rapidly indeed, and you need to keep on top of this. I'll be putting some of the things in a slide just to show you what I think on that area. By the way, you will get a copy of these slides, and I hope a script that goes with it as well. And so, coming back to the excellence point, I would just address my position that I think it's a business value exercise, not a cost, and that it will deliver excellence for your organization. So now we move into the corporate engagement in the public process, that of responsible political engagement. This is a picture of the House of Commons in the UK. As you probably know, there are not enough seats in the Parliament in the UK for all the MPs. It's done deliberately to try and create an atmosphere of tension and conflict. And of course, they don't attend all the time, but at the big events, you see that scene. Now, why should business engage in the political process? Well, the fact is that politics shapes the world in which your business operates. You can't stand back. There are people, of course, who say that business has no right to be taking part. But you can't stand back as a business. And also, business brings value because the business brings expertise and resources sometimes. You can help improve the legislation. And the activities of business, of course, are a concern to society and integral to society. So I think business has to be engaged to some extent in the political process. But there are problems because there's widespread public suspicion. There's the vulnerability of engagement to corruption. And there are uncertain areas about political engagement, lack of definition, what is proper and right to influence, what methods should be carried out. And there are risks for companies. Things can go wrong, bribery can occur, reputation can be damaged. This is the result of a survey by Transparency International of 114,000 people in 107 countries. And it showed that there was widespread suspicion about the role of vested interests and also about the integrity of politicians. You'll see that 54% of 114,000 people thought that governments were captured by vested interests. And of course, vested interests means very often business or oligarchs. But worse than that, we have corrupt political parties. 51 countries, the political system, political parties were seen as the most corrupt institution, above the police, judiciary, and so on. And in Thailand, 71% felt that the police were the most corrupt institution, closely followed by the political parties. Now, you might think that in talking to you today that I'm talking about developing emerging markets. But of course, actually, it's worse than you think, because in the UK, it's 66% of the population who think the political parties are corrupt, and in the United States, it's 76%. These are extraordinary figures. So when you're getting involved in political engagement, you're dealing with a world in which the public doesn't trust you. So we're going to have to deal with this somehow through managing political engagement. I just put this up to say, what's this? This is a duck house. This is a home for ducks in Someone's garden. It's an MP's garden. And he paid, this is in the UK, he paid for this out of his expenses refunded by the British public. This is fairly typical of some of the expense scandals we've had in the United Kingdom. No wonder the public fails to trust politicians. You're all familiar with the Corruption Perceptions Index from Transparency International. The world is coloured red mostly. That's where corruption is rife, prevalent. And in ASEAN, the red is still there. And Thailand's score hasn't moved. So there's great concern, of course, in Thailand about its score. In other countries wishing to, companies wishing to export to Thailand, they take a great view of that. But I would like to show you the progress over the years of the various ASEAN trends. You can see Singapore stands out, and it's pretty steady in most of the other countries. But I'm going to talk about the Corruption Perception Index and its limitations. The methodology, it doesn't show the degrees of significance. So the ranking order may not be quite what you think it is. This is a statistical issue. But there's a lag in perceptions. Brazil dropped this year because of the Petrobras affair. But the Petrobras affair started in 2006, not in 2016 or 2015. So there's a huge lag. And those countries which do well in their methods, the actual benefits in their ranking falls away. As I say, you will be getting copies of these slides. So. But it misses also, importantly, the wider corruption. Bribery is not the only issue in town. And Singapore, which scores very well with an 8 in the CPI, if you ask an Indonesian, they'll say, give us back our money. Because Singapore has $300 billion of Indonesian money, and as well as many of its millionaires in Singapore. It's opaque about its systems. It doesn't reveal information. So the CPI has its limits, but it's very useful to promote the interests of anti-corruption. So what causes mistrust? Continuing scandals, privileged access to companies, and it's hidden. Vast spending in the United States, and in Europe, particularly in the States, of course. And corruption is a bedfellow of political donations and using improper influence and methods. It starts at the top, and this just adds to the flavour. These are 4 prime ministers. 3 of them are in jail. Most recently, Omar of Israel, South Korea, Romania. And Tony Blair never went to jail and will not go to jail, but nevertheless, his party did receive £1 million from Bernie Ecclestone of Formula One, because at that time, the tobacco advertising was being removed from sponsorship, and Formula One relied very heavily. So Formula One said to the Labour Party in government, please can we have exemption for a number of years because we rely on tobacco. Here's £1 million. Tony Blair had to return that soon after because of public scandal. So it's at the top, and it creates the climate. How does corruption shape a political system? Well, we have 4 pillars of integrity. A society, a good functioning society relies on rule of law, the executive, the judiciary, a free press, and so on. But the pillars of integrity can, if they're weak, threaten the political system and political engagement. You have a weak opposition party, poor regulation, underfunded parties, and indeed, ultimately, the worst situation of state capture, where democracy has vanished and a state is captured by an oligarch or by a dictator. And then networks. There are many types of networks. There are family networks, networks of professionals, accountants, lawyers, bribers, all of them working. The head of anti-corruption in Kenya, John Gitongo, said before he fled the country in fear of his life, I didn't realize until I became the anti-corruption commissioner that it was not individuals but networks that created bribery and prevented me doing my work. So we have a blurring between the politicians and the business people very often, especially in societies where there's a small elite, that political careers are bought and promoted by patronage, and we have cronyism, nepotism. So there's a whole range of things there. And then we have illegal funding of parties, directors used to make donations and then refunded by their company, anonymous donations allowed, overseas donations, and then we have, getting very closely to contracts, political contributions made for favours or award of contracts. So this is just to show the interweaving of politics and business in Singapore. The Prime Minister's chairman of the Sovereign Wealth Fund and his wife manages the second wealth fund. So what can be done to counter corruption on a government level? First of all, governments pass laws regulating the monies given by companies and the monies received by political parties. They put limits on campaign spending, and then they have public registers recording what's being given or what's received. Also, registers of what lobbyists do and who they meet. There are only three registers of lobbyists at the moment. United States is obligatory, the others are voluntary. And then we have standards and codes of conduct for parliamentarians, and then transparency, open government, and freedom of information laws, and then supporting parties to try and remove the pressure on them to try and raise funds from business and elsewhere by providing grants, advertising support, or indeed tax relief. And investors are providing engagement and activism to put pressure on those who give money from the private sector, plus, of course, supported by civil society and media. And then we have the communities with votes, activism, and protest. And we are seeing continually now the public demonstrating. We have this week in Kosovo people camping in the main square wishing to bring down the government on the basis of the corruption it's been engaged in. And from the companies, your role is good practice and transparency. So why companies should care about responsible political engagement? I've talked about the reasons. It provides a sound economy and a fair market, and manages reputational risk. But increasingly, you're part of a global world which is demanding standards, particularly those in the supply chain. And also extraterritorial laws are becoming the common practice. We've seen the law in Thailand change just recently, so it now covers foreign public officials. Laws in Mexico and Brazil, China and Russia are also extraterritorial. So it's one world now, and if you're part of a supply chain, you're selling to an overseas company, they're going to be demanding standards of you which you have to show you meet. And political engagement is part of this process. And of course, we mustn't forget the fact that countering corruption is part of a company's contribution to building stable and prosperous societies, and this should be enshrined in values. I'm now going to cover briefly Transparency International UK's recent work in a survey of the 40 largest companies in the UK. There was a guidance document published on what good practice was, and there were indicators in that, and 26 of those were used to provide an index which was measured the public reporting of the 40 largest companies. There are 6 areas covered in the index. The control environment, which is the integrity environment which exists in the company, demonstrated by board oversight and public reporting, and then 4 forms of political activity, contributions, lobbying, memberships of trade associations, and the revolving door, which is the exchange of people. And the guidance goes a bit further. It covers politics in the workplace and how to implement a management system. They were published in December, and the audience was companies and legislators. The attitude of the survey and the index was a positive one. It was not that companies are involved in corruption, but rather companies are facing risks. Here's a way to help you manage those risks. So it's a positive improvement process, which I think should always be the aim. And 38 companies of the 40 surveyed nominated a point of contact for Transparency International UK to talk to. 35 provided feedback on the assessment that was sent to them of their public reporting so they could correct any errors. And 14 then provided further information which they hadn't published. And 7 companies, as a result of the process, changed their approach. They gave more information. The average score was less than 50%, 45% overall, and only one company, BG Group, which is a gas company, scored the back high points. Unfortunately, BG's now just been taken over by Shell, so we're going to lose that one. And the scores were raised very dramatically by publishing internal information. So I think there's a lesson there for companies. You have a lot of information inside you which you can publish, which will be a benefit to stakeholders and to promote your reputation. Why not use it? So the control environment, I put green ticks for good and crosses for where it wasn't so good. And I will just briefly go through the slides, but I think picking the main point out here, governance and accountability. This is a very important area for you, of course. The board oversight in this area was not reported. Only 10 of the 40. No stakeholder consultation to speak of, and people didn't talk about the internal controls they applied to political engagement. Public reporting. Now, the difference between transparency and public reporting is that transparency means people can look inside your company. Public reporting is a managed communication. It's you as the company reporting to the world on things you think important. You're trying to convey the message. Transparency is where, say, for instance, in public sector, where public procurement is open and you can see the processes. And here we've got a red cross. 53% reported on the guiding principles. That's the approach you adopt for countering, for responsible engagement. And only 8 companies gained full marks. This picture here at the bottom is Maersk, the pharmaceutical company, which is the #1 company in the US equivalent index. And they have a dedicated web page. So it shows it can be done. And easy access is a very important point. Put all the information in one spot so people can find it readily. And it doesn't change too often because your policies don't change often. So it's not, once you've done the initial work, it's not too big a task. 12 companies gave no meaningful information whatsoever on political activities out of the 40 largest. Richard Nixon, he's up here for a special reason because his corruption was the creation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. When they investigated Richard Nixon and the Watergate scandal, the investigators found, by the way, that 400 companies had spent $300 million on bribing overseas public officials. And they thought, well, that's shocking, we've got to do something about it. So that was the birth of the FCPA. And these are two quotations really saying, I think the first one's the best. What's the difference between a large contribution to campaigns and a bribe? Almost nothing. Oh. In the UK, we have an honour system. People get appointed to become peers. These are free business people who've been appointed peers. They were supporters of the Liberal Democratic Party, and they made cash contributions, cash donations. A very short while afterwards, they were made peers. Now, the point about that is they are entering a legislative chamber in the United Kingdom, and they haven't been voted in. They happen to have given some money. Of course, the Liberal Democratic Party denied it. An important point about this is, for you is to define what you mean by a political contribution. I'm not going to read it through. This is an example. It will be on the slide when you get it. But clarity of definitions is a critical piece for your work in managing political engagements, because no one knows quite what a political contribution is. There's no global definition of a political contribution. And it can even leave, in the UK, people can take time off from work to stand for Parliament. That could be considered as a political contribution. It's not sure. And so this is an area where companies have been required by law to report very often, certainly in the UK, so therefore the scoring was quite good in this area. But companies still are uncertain about what they report on. They will report on donations in the UK, Europe and America, but then they don't talk about the rest of the world. So they're unclear on this, and they're unclear on the criteria they use for their contributions. So more work needed. Responsible lobbying. This is a picture of the staff canteen in the White House, but this is where a lot of lobbying takes place. You don't see it. The lobbyists, the consultant lobbyists, are walking the corridors of the Senate. They're wandering into offices. They're chatting to people. In the UK, there are 4,000 people that work in the Houses of Commons. We don't know who they are some of the time. A lot of them are lobbyists. But it's the most efficient way for companies to make communications to parliamentarians. And it's very, very large in the United States, it's very large in London, and of course in Brussels. There are 15,000 lobbyists in Washington, it's estimated, and about 8,000 to 12,000 in Brussels, and London we don't know. But high-level contacts are another way of lobbying. The chief executive or the chairman is a lobbyist and can spend time at the highest level. The Elf Total chairman was killed in a plane crash coming back from Moscow. Why was he coming back from Moscow? He had just spent half a day with Putin. You don't need any other political influence if you've got half a day with the president of a country. Now, lobbyists can be third-party consultants, specialist consultants working for many companies, or they can, is often the case, be in-house. Shell, for instance, 9 out of 10 of their lobbyists, lobbying work is done in-house. And the work of lobbyists is manifold: providing information, negotiating and arguing positions, providing technical information, and then in the United States, providing resources even. In fact, lobbyists that quite often in the States will draft legislation which enters into the final form. But of course, we don't know who they're seeing, and they also have access, great access, much more than the citizen in the street. There's also improper activity through building constituencies where companies have been known to hide behind think tanks which they've created, publish false research, use social media to put messages out, and you just don't know what they're doing. This is a picture, this is called astroturfing. It's a common term for this sort of work. It means putting green plastic across a tennis court, but you put it across your political engagement. This is a US company in Hollywood where you could hire a crowd. They will provide actors, and the actors will do what you want. If you want to have a demonstration outside somebody, they will do that. Or if you want to be, if you're standing for as Trump is, you will hire them, and Trump will build his. And this is another example of imaginative lobbying. This is Taco Bell, for their franchisees. That each year they give tacos to the staff of the Congress, and there are hundreds, they come down for it. And why was Taco Bell doing this? Not because they wanted to feed the staff, it's because Obama Medicare is going to put the cost up of the franchisees, and they were lobbying. There are many instances like this. So there's a lot to do on reporting of lobbying. Great variation. Companies don't report how much they give. They don't report their participation in registers. In fact, companies were reporting very little, and yet Transparency International found that they were actually registered. 34 were registered, but only 9 reported that they had registration. And they don't publish their aims and the topics and the activities they're doing. The public wants to know, what are the key concerns, climate change? What are your aims and ambitions for this? And what are the main activities you've undertaken? It can be done. It's been done in some companies, notably, as I said, Merck. And how much do you spend? No company reported their global lobbying expenditure, probably because it's very difficult to gather that information. One knows how difficult it is for companies, the huge amount of reporting and demands on their time. So another route, another aspect of lobbying is trade associations. And IOD, please excuse me putting this chart up, but this is the Confederation of Business Industry for the UK. It's the main membership organisation for businesses in the UK. We also, of course, have an Institute of Directors as well. The reason I chose the CBI is because they've been lobbying very heavily against the Bribery Act. First of all, when it was introduced, and now they're still lobbying to change it because they say that British industry is being put at a competitive disadvantage because it can't pay bribes. It's talking specifically about 2 areas. One is small bribes, facilitation payments, and the other area is hospitality, where businesses are very concerned that hospitality could be judged as bribery by the Serious Fraud Office. So that's why I picked it out. But they're a very powerful route, and the sums are absolutely large. The US Chamber of Commerce spent $35 million in 2014 federal elections. And you won't find information from trade associations on who their members are, on the fees, or indeed that much on the lobbying. And there are great risks for companies when using an intermediary like a trade association, because you're only one of many members. The views may conflict with your companies, and the message may be diluted. So these are just a few of the things that are wrong. You'll find more in the guidance. And there was a poor response in the index. Average score of 24% over only, and only 3 companies published a complete list of their memberships, and only 4 reported details. The revolving door, this is the exchange between business and the government, or the public sector. And where it goes wrong is that people are promised jobs before they leave, or when they leave, they are then engaged in lobbying their former department for favour for the company. And again, bear in mind public suspicion. And it can include secondees, but if you think about it, it's 2 ways, because Dick Cheney went from Halliburton to the US executive, which is commonplace. Business leaders go to the executive in the United States. And in the UK, it's quite common for ministers to move into boards. So transparency is the name of the game. Here's some examples of nothing wrong with these, but it just shows you where you've got a small elite of business and political talent. There's a natural progression or exchange between the sectors. This lady was the first female director of Shell in Nigeria, and she ended up as the Minister for Oil, and now she's chairman of OPEC. This lady was the regulator in Canada, and after 15 years and regulating IGM International, she joined it. This is a very important guy. This is I mentioned the FCPA. This is Mark Mendelsohn. The FCPA sort of went into sleep for many years, and in the early part of the century, he resurrected it and made it a very good business for the Department of Justice. And he was the man who was driving the prosecutions. And he left in 2010, and now he's defending the companies from the DOJ. And this is fairly typical. I think and here's, again, going back to the UK, which is where I'm starting from. This is two ministers who were trading in information. The terrible thing is, though everybody agreed that they had traded in information, they'd offered their previous contacts. The committee in the House of Commons, the commissioner, found that they hadn't broken any rules. It's okay, to everybody's fury. It's a case of the standards not being up to the need. So this is an area of complete neglect, really, in the public reporting. Lowest score, only 7% out of the maximum marks. And no company had a policy for the move from their company to public office. They relied on the rules of the ministry or conflicts of interest rules on their human resources department. The point is, you're protecting yourself if you've got these rules. If the chances are that a move like that could end up in the press in, say, the UK, which has got a strong investigative press. And if you have public, transparent rules, you're protecting the company. So this whole process here is partly about protecting your company, but making your engagement more effective, but also contributing to the wider picture, which I mentioned earlier on, of creating a just society in which political activities are going to become free in due course from corruption. And don't forget the workplace in your planning, but I won't go into that now. Just to mention an example of donations going out of a company by way of management, SNC Lavalin were alleged to have steered $1 million in Canada illegally to a political party by their managers paying the donations and then being refunded. Management systems is very important in this, and very simply, you have to be clear on your policies and procedures, get the drive and energy from your board and your leadership, and then have appropriate internal controls. Communicate and train, and engage with stakeholders and report publicly. So it's a standard sort of system, but do have it managed in a coordinated, consistent way across your organization if you're a global company, or if you have many facilities in this country. I'm now going to talk about the global landscape for countering bribery, and I've got about 8 minutes left. So this is roughly what it looks like at the moment. It's things coming at you from all directions. So I'm just going to go through some of the things in no particular order, but the global community, you're now part of a global community. Tightening laws, I've mentioned extraterritorial reach. So you may, if you've got operations with a company based in the UK, come under that company's interest in you. If you actually have operations in the UK, you will fall under the UK Bribery Act. If you use US dollars or use the wires of the United States, telephone or banking, you, as the members of FIFA found out, 14 of them so far, you will be hauled off to the United States, or could be. The complexity of supply chains, how many tiers do you go down in the supply chain is the issue for a large global company, and sometimes the second tier in a supply chain may be more important than the first tier. Very difficult. General Motors probably has got 800,000 suppliers. That's the most extreme example. How on earth can you deal with that? And what is reasonable and what is proportionate? And the answer, I think, really is generally given now, focus on the real risks. And how do you find the real risks? Well, you take a judgment. When you've done your brainstorming, you take a judgment, and then the board agrees these are the real risks, and they will give you the appropriate resources. Social media, civil society things, civil society pressure, the growing role of corporate responsibility, the values, the introduction of sustainable development goals just been agreed at the end of last year. Countries have agreed the 20 sustainable development goals, and the anti-corruption is on the 16th. This is ambitious, but you have the world agreeing on sustainability. They don't agree on the targets. And then we have continuing scandals. So what are the anti-corruption measures which are important? I've mentioned the focus on the integrity culture. This is a big one. Probably one of the main takeaways for you today from the presentation is ISO 37001, which is a standard for anti-bribery management systems. It's in draft right now and will be completed at the end of this year. Companies are going to be asking their suppliers to show evidence of ISO 37001. And it will have some bearing on your self-evaluation tool because, as I was discussing with Colin, it might be that there needs to be some alignment. But it's certainly something that should be on your radar right now. It's out for consultation. You can buy it from the ISO, and I think it's going to become very important. Certification is not the only, it's not necessarily the ideal and total solution, but it's a starting point. The content of the ISO 37001 is standard. It aligns to what's in the self-evaluation tool. It'll be different wording with some different emphasis, but there's nothing to be surprised about. No impunity. The world is changing on this front. What this means is that the prosecutors are now going after the individuals. And you've seen this in the United States last year. And Transparency International has also now looking for naming individuals and naming companies. And it's just published the 10 organizations which it believes civil society should be targeting. And the UK head of the Serious Fraud Office is trying to extend the scope of the UK Bribery Act to cover financial services. So we will have the adequate procedures approach and the idea that the technical term, the guiding mind, is removed and the company then becomes responsible for the actions of its employees. So the role of the employee, the no impunity is a big area. New technology. Companies globally have not picked up on this. I don't think companies know their supply chain is generally the lesson. Even the largest companies don't know their supply chain. Data can help you manage that, but analyzing your data, forensic analysis of your data, use of it for improving your processes, many, many things you can do with it. The cloud is an important part of that because you can store that data off site and make it accessible to your organization. And the Internet of Things can be very useful in supply chain. It means really everything is connected through technology, so you can track shipments and so on. A big area is transparency, a greater demand for transparency. Country-by-country reporting legislation has been passed to deal with the extractive sector, both in the USA and Europe. And we're also looking in the financial sector for organizational transparency because we need to know who the owners are of companies. At the moment, the real owners can hide behind various company schemes, and there's pressure for that. Public reporting, well on the way. Countries are now passing legislation requiring directors to state their position on corporate responsibility or on risks, and we'll see more of that. And Transparency International has been doing a great deal of work. It published a survey of anti-corruption reporting in developing economies, and 4 Thai companies were in that, and PTT did very well in that score, though the other 3 Thai companies didn't do quite as well. And then open government, that's the transparency thing, getting the data and the information you need without any obstacles. So to finish off, I'm just going to say, think out of the box, move your point of reference in countering corruption. This is the new person in the Department of Justice, Hui Chen. She's Chinese originally, but she's been appointed as a compliance expert. And here she is saying that compliance is a cost, which I don't agree with. If you're just looking at compliance as a cost, it's not a very attractive area. You should be looking at it as a business excellence and a business gain, reputational integrity, supplier of preferred choice. This is where your company should be aiming to move this into expression of your values as a company, not as a cost center. So here we have the US divide. The US looks at it as a compliance process. Europe is looking at it as a principles process. And here's the excellent statement from the European Foundation for Quality Management, one of the 2 international quality bodies. The other is the Baldrige Award. So my message here is think about anti-corruption as an excellence model, and I think the self-evaluation tool of CAC is a prime example of how companies are doing this. and build sustainable development into this. This says here, Sustainability Incorporated, a leading consultancy, says few companies have integrated sustainability into their business models. So, sustainability through integrity, sustainability rather than the cost of corruption. 30% of the Kenyan citizens' income goes in bribes. The cost of corruption bribery may be up to 60% of the cost. The World Bank reckons that sometimes only 10% of its loans and grants get to where it's supposed to go to. 90% vanishes through fraud and other corruption. So this brings us back to this here, which is actually a business excellence improvement process. So what I would like to sort of conclude really as my feelings on this is that if you're going to do things in this area, first of all, the board has got to be very vigorous and challenging on this and put pressure on its management. Secondly, recognise you're part of a global community now and think how you can do this. How can it deliver business value rather than be seen as something you have to do to avoid going to jail? That's the most extreme example, but really look at it as something that's positive and not just meeting adequate procedures of the UK Bribery Act. Have very good management systems which are implemented, and I think consider very carefully how, in terms of the supply chain, the 37001 ISO standard will impact you over the coming years. But recognise it's a dynamic world, and this organisation here today, I think, will help you gain a window on that world by bringing experts in to tell you what's going on and to raising the standards. So I thank you very much. I know it's a lot of information. It's in the slides, and I've covered it very, very fast, but I hope it gives you a flavour. And transparency, of course, is the quick win to finish off. I think as an organisation, I'd like to suggest the CAC considers how you can gain advantage from reporting the good work you're doing in a consistent, systematic manner, so companies can see, stakeholders can see, and the government see what you're doing, that you're doing it well. So thank you very much.
Do you have any questions? มีคำถามไหมคะ Okay ค่ะ If none has question, on behalf of Thai IOD, we would like to thank you, Mr. Peter Wilkinson, for the information that you just shared to us. Please give a big round of applause to our speaker.
Thank you.
And now, may I invite Dr. Panat Simasathian, Chairman of CAC, to present our speaker with a token of appreciation. ค่ะ และขอเรียนเชิญศาสตราจารย์ฮิรัน ระดีศรีประธานกิตติมศักดิ์ IOD ขึ้นบนเวทีเพื่อถ่ายรูปหมู่ร่วมกันอีกครั้งนะคะค่ะขอบคุณทุกท่านเป็นอย่างสูงนะคะสุดท้ายนี้ขอขอบคุณธนาคารกรุงเทพจำกัดมหาชนบริษัทปตทจำกัดมหาชนที่ให้การสนับสนุนกิจกรรมในวันนี้ค่ะและขอขอบคุณทุกท่านที่ให้เกียรติมาร่วมงานในวันนี้ค่ะสวัสดีค่ะ